Very few wrestlers in history make the impact that Rey Mysterio did. He knew wrestling since a young age, and by the time he was wrestling in ECW, he was very experienced despite being around 21. Rey started wrestling when he was 14 and didn't look back. Very few wrestlers had that high-flying ability and talent to captivate audiences around the world. Regardless of his positioning, Rey was always going to be a valuable asset for the company he wrestled in. ECW noticed that but were unable to keep a hold of him. WCW comes in and they made the most out of his talents, using him as a part of the new Cruiserweight division. Rey amazed the worldwide audience effortlessly and moved in a way that seemed unimaginable, especially in this era. When you look back at this time period, they weren't exactly familiar with high-flying wrestling, especially with the way these guys were doing it. Mysterio Jr.'s efforts earned him multiple classics and Cruiserweight title reigns. There was also a charm with the mask and entrance. He felt mythical at times, being known as the Giant Killer. While WCW did eventually unmask him and left him flatlined, WWE saw a huge opportunity to bring back the mask and give it a life of its own. Rey's aura returned with the mask, and with the great promotional promos, he was back to being a special attraction. Despite his age, Rey was still the most unique wrestler in the entire WWE. His booking wasn't that of a main eventer, but he was always a major part of the show and in turn grew to become an international phenomenon. Depending on where you're from, Rey Mysterio is most likely one of the most famous wrestlers in your country. To this day, people think anyone with a mask is a budget Rey Mysterio. I think if there was an average poll for the world, Rey would always be in the conversation along with The Rock and John Cena. For some reason, he's very famous and I've seen it firsthand. So it's not like I'm talking nonsense, you know? Like, it's not like, oh, Rey Mysterio's famous. I've seen it with my own eyes. He goes to Colombia, UAE, Japan, a lot of people will know him. That mask made WWE loads of money, not to mention Rey's offense was incredibly different and exciting. He's the smallest world champion in WWE, holding the title on 3 different occasions, with the third being one we don't want to talk about. We're good off that one, especially because it didn't happen at SummerSlam. He broke barriers, but at the same time made it even harder for someone to follow up. Rey was a massive draw in the Latino community. He had a great connection with his people, and even though Eddie's passing helped, that connection was always going to be the difference maker to his push. Now, while Rey had the drawing power for a different market, that being the Latino market in Latin America, there was one man in that era that could hold the same claim: Eddie Guerrero. A wrestling icon, Eddie honed his craft all around the world and became a sought-after talent in the mid-90s. Eddie's size wasn't notable in the wrestling world, but he had plenty of intensity and a certain knack to be one of the best. It pushed him to greater heights and established him as one of the top cruiserweights in WCW. Similar to Rey, he hit a flatline and his greatest days were going to be with the WWE. By this time period, he had worked hard on his mic skills and expanded his heel character. It boded well for him, but nobody realized Latino Heat's greatest asset was a strong connection to the fans. The summer of 2003 proved that Eddie was a huge draw in the Latino community, to the point where WWE turned him face and even considered giving him the WWE Championship. You know, when that question is asked, the wrestler is very popular, and they eventually did it. Eddie ran into some problems. For one, the pressure was too much. In addition, he had nobody to feud with after WrestleMania. JBL was a mid-card wrestler that WWE forced people to believe is an actual threat. When you look at his early days as a heel, he looks so out of place in the main event scene. JBL of April 2004 to JBL of April 2005 are 2 significantly different people. Regardless, Eddie was a huge Mexican star similar to Rey. When he passed away, he left a huge hole in the SmackDown main event scene, not to mention was the other big Latino draw in WWE. Now, as you know, WWE always wants to expand. Expanding into Mexico is always a priority, even with the popularity of AAA and CMLL. It worked with Rey and Eddie. Eddie, though, passed away. With Rey, there was a time from 2006 to 2009. He was injured often and had to be sidelined. He was always going to have a place, but he wasn't in the plans as often because of injury. When he's healthy, it's all good. He even won a world championship again. And unfortunately, instead of making stars, WWE seemed to focus on quickly getting someone to follow Eddie and Rey. It was always going to be a tough task because those are 2 of the most iconic wrestlers of their era, and it's often led to mistakes and issues that could be resolved. More often than not, though, it seems to be the talent's mistake rather than WWE's. They were pushing them hard or whatever, but sometimes it was the talent themselves. Mil Mascaras is one of the greatest luchadors of all time. There's El Santo, Blue Demon, and there's Mil Mascaras. These 3 were very influential in the history of Mexican wrestling and definitely an inspiration to the men I just mentioned. The Mascaras family is iconic with plenty of standouts to come from it. In the modern era came one notable talent, the nephew of Mil Mascaras and the son of his brother Jose Dos Caras Jr., a gifted amateur wrestler and luchador. He wrestled with a mask until WWE came calling. While it was something he disliked, WWE saw something in him to become a huge villain, so it worked in his favor. Even then, he wasn't happy about it despite his potential push. A lot of people tend to look at him differently now, but from a 2010 perspective, there's reasons to understand Dos Caras Jr., as WWE eventually called him Alberto Del Rio. WWE unmasked him and liked his look, not to mention he had great wrestling skills. Del Rio was charismatic and could talk. His charisma wasn't lighting the world on fire, but it was decent enough. It wasn't exactly a charisma vacuum. He looked very prepared and ready for anything upon his debut. debut as the Mexican aristocrat. He was basically the Mexican JBL without the contempt for foreigners. Instead of foreigners, he hated poor people, just like JBL later on. He's an easy choice for the next Latino star, and they pushed him hard. Royal Rumble win. In kayfabe, he won the greatest Royal Rumble in history, the 40-man one. He became Money in the Bank and crashed the summer of Punk to become the new WWE champion. All of this within the first year of his WWE career. On paper, it looks good, but it wasn't that. It didn't stop them from giving him another WWE title reign 2 months later. The problem with Del Rio is that he was pushed super hard with no real reason other than the fact that he had potential to be the next Latino star. His matches were decent to good, but being WWE champion, you need to have something stand out. I know a lot of people don't like Miz's run, but in the lead up to it, he had some great promos and riled up the fans. He stood out because of his promos. Del Rio had nothing other than the fact that he just happened to be someone they believed could be the next Mexican star. Again, he wasn't a bad wrestler at all. Decently versed, but he was pushed super hard. It didn't work out because not only was he an upper mid-carder pushed as a main eventer, but also the fact that he had so many problems outside of the ring. He was partying a lot, not to mention got released for slapping a guy. He said a racist joke and Del Rio slapped him. His return was once again an attempt to do a ROI. He beat John Cena clean for the US title and was the one that ended the entire run where he was facing wrestlers for the title. His run didn't work out so well after that, and he left after realizing they weren't gonna push him. Del Rio was a guy that was pushed too hard and too soon. After 4 months of debuting, he won the Rumble and faced Edge for the title at WrestleMania. It's crazy. And again, he had a lot of upside upon his debut. Rey Mysterio helped make him look like a great heel. He was tall, came from a wrestling family, and felt like royalty. But it just didn't work. Rey Mysterio's constant injuries led to WWE looking elsewhere for another huge Mexican star. They came across Mystico. Mystico was already an incredible talent and was considered to be one of the very best wrestlers of the late 2000s. There was no reason for them to not sign him. WWE did bring him in, and he was actually Triple H's first signing. And at the time, it was very, very optimistic. Triple H's first signing was one of the best wrestlers in Mexico and someone who's considered one of the best wrestlers in the world. His name was Sin Cara. With a name like that, this guy was definitely going to be WWE champion. The only thing standing in his way was horrible lighting. The Sin Cara's presentation was amazing initially, but the light was bad. It was one of the worst additions to a character. Then to make matters worse, you're thinking to yourself, the light's bad, but he has good presentation, he's also a good wrestler, let's see more of him. There's a couple of reasons as to why Sin Cara had a huge problem with WWE in his first year. One of them is the fact that he refused to learn English. His matches with wrestlers that could speak Spanish worked much better. But because he didn't learn English, not to mention the style of WWE is slightly different because they wrestle on the right side as opposed to the left side in Mexico, he was botching a lot, which had to do with a different style and the fact that he didn't care to learn English to work with wrestlers. And my favorite part in all of this is the fact that he refused to go to FCW to learn about WWE. Del Rio had to go. All of the top wrestlers had to go in that era. He refused to go. Mystico and Sin Cara were two different wrestlers. You weren't seeing one of the best wrestlers and at the time, the best Mexican wrestler. WWE style is of course different, but I've never seen such a top tier wrestler like Mystico struggle to adjust. He had injuries. We never got to see that big Rey versus Sin Cara match, and he got replaced by Hunico in the end. It's unfortunate because in another world, Sin Cara could have been a major star. I really like the Azul versus Negro feud because it felt like a comic book story. It also featured some of the best matches from the original Sin Cara. But yeah, WWE had tremendous hopes for this guy. They were planning on making a big WrestleMania 28 match between Sin Cara and Rey Mysterio. That was their plan before Rey got injured, and of course Sin Cara himself got injured a couple of months later. Sin Cara's failure was another in WWE's attempt to make a new Mexican star. Surely the next masked luchador didn't fail. Kalisto down in NXT displayed a fluidity and uniqueness as a high flyer that hadn't been seen in a while in WWE. Kalisto had that captivating high flyer style down and was often a favorite of mine in WWE. He was paired with the new Sin Cara, which was Hunico, and they became a great tag team. The Lucha Dragons consistently featured in great matches and were looking like a great addition to the main roster. They weren't pushed hard, but Kalisto did have that moment where he hit the Salida del Sol off the ladder. It was insane, and WWE decided to give him a push. Kalisto surprisingly won the United States Championship twice within a month. He was much better than Sin Cara and had some momentum. Then the draft came and the Good Luchas Thing promo happened, and this is where things changed. One of the promos that highlighted just how weak Kalisto was on the mic. It's already bad being a luchador in WWE, but a bad promo, he was cooked. He did do some notable things on SmackDown, became Cruiserweight Champion, and his first year on SmackDown was actually nice. You know, he got to feud with Baron Corbin and Dolph Ziggler, but he never got pushed harder, and a part of that is because of his entire appeal. Rey isn't the greatest promo ever, but he brings a lot of emotion and often has the crowd actually caring about what he has to say. Not to mention that even though Kalisto was a great high flyer, he wasn't an amazing one. Grand Metalik and Lince Dorado also fell victim. Those two were in a faction with Kalisto that didn't really go anywhere, and if anything, didn't show what they were truly capable of, especially Grand Metalik. I was one of the people that had high hopes for Kalisto at the time. I remember actually enjoying his matches a lot, but he doesn't have that vibe about him where it's like, I really want to watch his match, and I think that's a part of why he wasn't pushed hard. Now, WWE's had a lot of Latino stars throughout the years. There is two notable talent that are gonna come in by the looks of it. Penta, El Zero Miedo, and of course Rey Fenix. Rey Fenix is still in All Elite Wrestling at the moment due to contract issues, but it seems like he's heading to WWE. These two are a tremendous addition to the roster because of the fact that they have a lot of appeal. Rey Fenix was actually my favorite AEW wrestler in 2021, just want to mention that. When I first watched him, I was actually overwhelmed. I wasn't even like, damn. I was very overwhelmed by his style and the way he wrestled, and I think WWE is gonna enjoy having these two in the company. These two are notable names when it comes to high flyers and luchadors. It's just WWE's intention shouldn't just be, we're gonna push this guy and market them and make them the next big Latino stars. It should be more about looking just for a star. Like, yeah, you want to expand and look for people that are from different countries and whatnot. There was a time where it felt like they were trying to force someone to follow Rey Mysterio, when you just can't, because Rey Mysterio is one of the all-time great talents. Not to mention, Eddie Guerrero is another name they couldn't replace. You can't replace those two. Now, WWE is always looking for the next big Mexican Latino star, and they were also looking for someone to follow up Rey Mysterio. When it comes to Rey Mysterio though, they didn't realize that the next person to follow him up was his actual son, or Eddie Guerrero's son, I'm not sure. Dominic Mysterio. Now, Dominic Mysterio is not going to be his father, obviously. He's not going to be one of those luchadors, but he is someone to follow up on the Mysterio name, seeing as he's his son. Dominic exhibits a lot of entirely different qualities than Rey ever did. If anything, he relates to Eddie Guerrero a bit more, but that's one of the things you don't want to mention around here, the fact that someone relates to Eddie. It's almost a curse. We've heard this throughout the years. It's a very, I want to say lazy, but it's a very boring comparison. With Dominic, though, he exhibits a lot of qualities that Eddie does as a heel. For me, I feel like he's his own guy, and he's someone to follow up on Rey Mysterio. Is he going to be like Rey Mysterio? No, obviously not. Rey Mysterio is one of the most unique wrestlers of all time. Him and Eddie Guerrero, they're very notable names in their eras. Dominic is someone to follow up Rey, simply because he's his son. They didn't really need to look far for someone to follow up on Rey Mysterio because there's his actual son. Is he going to have the same qualities as Rey Mysterio did? No, but he's going to have the Mysterio name. He's probably going to be a good talent in the future, so there's that. One element that would help Dominic a lot is his moveset. Now, we see him as a wrestler, he's just there, but he has a little to show. It's just he wrestles as a heel, and they don't want him to be more of that showman, and similar to his father, I guess, is why he doesn't wrestle like a pure luchador. The thing is, we gotta see him. We have to see him in the future wrestle like that in the future, because that to me will be the test to see how big Dominic could fly. Because I think he could be a mid-card heel and whatnot, but I think if he has a great moveset and he could wrestle great and he can improve tremendously, he could go a bit higher than that, especially if he could work as a face as well in the future. His story with his father, possibly he's gonna end with him turning face, who knows. Now, I was about to end this video, but then I was like, a lot's missing from it. There's a couple of people we have to talk about, and some of the reasons why these wrestlers get treated the way they do. Obviously, there's a lot of Latino wrestlers in WWE, but they're usually pigeonholed. Damian Priest is a guy who isn't pigeonholed, which I think is amazing. He feels more of his own man. He's established. He's got a world title run. He's around in the upper mid-card semi-main eventer scene. They've done well with him. When it comes to others though, it's a different story. I think one of the reasons why Priest succeeded so much is because he wasn't compared to certain wrestlers like the next couple of guys I'm about to mention. WWE's had a lot of Latino stars throughout the years, Legado del Fantasma for one. They're a great group, but I think because the leader Santos Escobar is much older, they don't really care about pushing them. Los Garza are a decent team in WWE, but there was a lot of high hopes for Angel Garza in particular. He's the nephew of Hector Garza, who was a great talent back in his day, and Angel down in NXT exhibited a lot of great qualities. He had the character and flair, and was someone to look out for. Unfortunately though, he was a talent that was seen as the next Eddie Guerrero, and you guys know, when you get called the next Eddie Guerrero, it's cursed from there. There was reasons to compare him to Eddie Guerrero because he had that look, he was kind of that sleazy heel, great wrestler, but ever since he went to the main roster, he hasn't shined as bright as we'd imagine him. I think one of the reasons for that is because a lot of these guys usually wrestle a cruiserweight style, and they don't get to show that on the main roster as much compared to the heavyweights and all those. With the cruiserweight style, you kind of have to go down to NXT or do something else. Then you get paired in a tag team, they do nothing with you, and that's what it is. Same with his partner Berto. He's of course Angel Garza's cousin. He's a good wrestler, but we don't really get to see much of them. The Mexicals got pigeonholed when they debuted in 2005 as a trio. They could have been some of the most iconic luchadors in their era, but because WWE did the whole Juan Deere thing, not to mention did not push them that hard, despite the fact that they got a connection with the fans, Juventud got released for that 450, they were cursed. They were never gonna succeed with that gimmick. And it's not just because of that gimmick, they got over in spite of it. But WWE at the time, they didn't really care about cruiserweights as much as they did only 2 years earlier. Dragon Lee's another name who I've been seeing being hyped up, and he's a good wrestler. Once again, he's a great wrestler, straight up. A great wrestler is Dragon Lee. But because of the whole Rey Mysterio comparison thing, he's pigeonholed. I think WWE needs to wipe that off, because every wrestler gets compared to Rey Mysterio and it's horrible. Dragon Lee's a great wrestler, it's just he's not being booked much, similar to Los Garza. I also want to add that Dragon Lee's in the LWO right now. Even then, because he's paired with Rey Mysterio, it's supposed to mean something, but that's one of the problems again. It's like you have to be associated with someone who's a luchador, who's a Mexican wrestler or whatever, and it makes sense in some areas, but not all the time. It feels like it takes away from said talent. The greatest representation of a Mexican wrestler in WWE right now, other than Rey Mysterio and Dominic, is of course Andrade. Andrade's actually been doing decently right now. I see a title reign in his future. He's not like the other luchadors where we have to compare him to Rey Mysterio. Sure, he did team up with him earlier this year, but he's his own man. Similar to Damian Priest, Andrade is carving his own path, and it seems to be working well for him. You know, we've seen him on TV more often. He's got a great look. Not to mention, since the last time we've seen him in WWE, he's gotten much bigger, had an AEW run. I see a US title in his future. He's actually doing well, and I wish him nothing but the best. Now, we mentioned a bunch of wrestlers throughout this video. There's been talent that has been pushed, obviously. Sometimes it hasn't worked. But if you're a luchador, and I know luchador is a wrestler in Spanish, they use it differently in the American companies. If you're a luchador, your best bet is to become a tag team wrestler. If you become a tag team wrestler, you have a better chance to succeed. And even then, your chances might be minimal. It's unfortunate, but that's how it is. You know, like, these guys have to be super extraordinary to get a push. You gotta be like insanely great all around, have the age, charisma, mic skills, a connection with the fans, and of course in ring to be taken as a real threat or something. This is the thing, we're not gonna say all these people deserve a world title, but some of them don't even feel like a threat to the mid-card titles. We're not gonna be like, oh, automatically deserves world title. You answer this, how many of these people deserve a world title, world championship? It's just we hope to see more of the Mexican wrestlers, the Latino wrestlers, the Spanish wrestlers have more of a fair shake when compared to previous years. So there's that. Stephanie Vaquero, though, on NXT is a whole entirely different story. The way they presented her upon her debut, the way they've been booking her, she feels like a big deal along with Julia. So maybe the future does look good for luchadors, who knows? Alright, what you guys think of the stars that tried to follow up Rey Mysterio? Please comment down below, and that's it for this video. Make sure you hit the frog splash on the like button, perhaps the 619 on the subscribe button. Peace, I'm out.